Hi guys, I'm John from Owens Estate Planning Services, and if you're a parent, you know that having children is not easy. From when they're very little, they cause you some worries. When they grow a little bit older, they cause you different worries, and when they get older, as adults themselves, you're still worrying. There's still problems, there's still issues on your mind about their life. The difference being that when they're adults, you can't control them anymore. You've got no control over what they're going to do, who they're going to be with, what they're getting up to, what trouble they're getting into. It can be a nightmare. And when it comes to families looking to then sort wills out, having issues like this going on, it prevents them from doing it because they think there isn't a solution out there. They can't find a way to get around these issues in the will. So we're going to have a look at a discretionary trust today and try and get you to understand how it can be really useful for all sorts of family scenarios. We're going to need a little scenario behind me, and this is going to be a real extreme version so you can see how even then a trust like this can work. Now, a lot of people get put off by the word trust. They think it's for either really rich people or it's just really complicated, and actually a trust is kind of like a money box or a piggy bank, whatever you want to call it. And when you've passed away, rather than it going directly to people, it goes into this piggy bank. And then you hand that piggy bank to a couple of people that you trust, and you say, right, you look after this until such time that it's right to give what's inside it to the people that I want you to give it to. That's essentially a simple version of a trust, or particularly this trust here, which is called a discretionary trust. So let's see how the family's set up, and you can understand the problems that's being faced. Okay, at the top we've got Martin and Sue. Sue is divorced, Martin's never been married. These guys have been together for 5 years, and let's say they're in their mid-60s. Sue's got 3 adult children, Matt, Polly and Tim. She has an estate worth around about £500,000, predominantly the house, which is worth £350,000, and the savings of £150,000. Martin doesn't really have a lot, and we're not going to really focus on him other than to say he's a really nice guy. Sue loves him, the kids like him, they get on with him really well. But ultimately what Sue wants to do in the long run is make sure that when she goes, the people who are legally in line for her assets are the 3 kids. But we've got a problem. Polly, first of all, Polly's got a husband who's not liked at all by Sue. There's a good reason for it. He's a bit of an arse, okay? So, son-in-law, big problem. Not only is Sue worried about the son-in-law not being a very nice person, she's also convinced that sooner or later, Polly is going to see the light and going to split up from him. And if she was to inherit the money from Sue, just as the divorce is going through and there's a financial settlement, that inheritance could be lost, in part at least, to the son-in-law. We don't want that. Tim has a gambling problem, we're going to say. There's so many issues that we could pick. We'll go for gambling. And essentially, every pound he gets in, he's down the bookies and he's spending it, unfortunately. Matt, meanwhile, Matt's got a really bad drink problem. Again, every pound he gets, he's down the pub having a drink. So neither Tim or Matt are good candidates to be receiving a large amount of money at the moment, because the odds are if it comes in, it's all going to be spent. And sooner or later they'll look back and really regret the fact that they have just either drank it all or gambled it all away. So Sue does not want them to have it as things stand, as they are right now. She wants them to eventually be able to have it, but not actually get hold of it now. Furthermore, we've mentioned Martin. Well, Martin, like I said earlier, he's a real nice guy, and Sue doesn't want him just to be kicked out of the house if she dies before him, which in theory could happen if she was just leaving it straight to the kids. Now, when you leave it straight to the kids in a normal will, there aren't any other powers that the will gives you. The will's job basically is to say to the executor, right, here's all the assets, now give it out to these people. The executor can't go, well, but what about Polly and her divorce? It doesn't matter. Polly, at that point, the minute Sue's passed away, Polly's entitled to her share in the will, and the executor can't do anything. Even if Polly doesn't want it and says, oh, please keep hold of it, I don't want it yet, there's nothing she can do. Absolutely nothing she can do. So that's why we use a trust. Rather than using a simple will and giving it straight down to the kids, we're going to use a trust. So we're going to sleep draw a trust here just so you can kind of visualise it. So it kind of is a halfway house. It sits here before going down to the beneficiaries. And whilst it's here, like I've just been saying a minute ago about Martin, well, Martin's a nice guy and Sue doesn't want him kicked out. So what she's going to say is she wants Martin to be able to use the house, live in the house and benefit from it for the rest of his lifetime. He doesn't need the money can be used elsewhere, but the house itself, she wants him to have that security, which is lovely. Now, how this trust works is the money goes down into it and sits in here, and it's controlled, like I said earlier, like the piggy bank. You give it to a couple of people to look after. They're called the trustees. Now, these could be, in theory, they could be children, they could be beneficiaries, they could be people who are benefiting it in the short term, or they could just be some friends. So for now, let's just say they're a couple of friends. We'll call them Bob and Carol, let's just say. Doesn't have to be friends, but in this scenario, it's probably more suitable to have it. Sometimes, if you've only got one child that's an issue, the other two might be the trustees, as long as they all get on and that the testator knows they're going to do the right thing in the long run. They could do it like that as well. But in this scenario, I don't think anyone's in a great position to be a trustee, so we're going for Bob and Carol. Okay, so Sue passes away before Martin. Estate goes into the trust, trustees look after it. Now, what Sue's done in the will, as part of the trust, is she's written down a list of all the people who can benefit. So we've got 1, 2, 3 and 4. And then she's also written down what's called a letter of wishes, which is basically her list of instructions to Bob and Carol. And she said, out of the people on my list who could benefit, this is what I'd like you to do in a perfect world. If that perfect world isn't in existence, hold on to it and wait for that perfect world to emerge. So in her list, in her letter of wishes, what she's going to have done is say, right guys, if I go first, Martin gets to live in the house for the rest of his lifetime. You can even, if you want to, sell the house and buy another one for him to live in if he fancies moving somewhere else. It's up to you. He never gets the money that's in that house, he just gets the house itself to live in. And she says, look, guys, unless he meets somebody new and starts cohabiting and remarries, let him live there. I don't want anyone to be able to throw him out. I don't want any pressure from the kids to get rid of him. You look after it for him, okay? But there's still £150,000 of savings in here. And ultimately she wants a three-way split. So with 150,000, in theory, that's there to go at any point to the kids. But obviously we've got these problems preventing us. But this is actually 15 years later. So Sue made her will, she set the trust up, and 15 years later she's died. And in that time, Polly's actually, she's seen the light, as Sue hoped, and she's got rid of the son-in-law. She's now in a really good place. There's nothing to stop her getting the share of the savings going straight down to her now. So she can get her 50k at that point. So rather than the money just sitting in that trust, the trustees go, right, well, Polly's fine. You can have your 50k if you want it, Polly. Tim and Matt, let's say right now, are still not in a great position, so theirs stays in the trust. A few years later, Tim finally kicks the habit. Goes to AA. He doesn't go to AA because that wouldn't really help him, would it? He goes to Gamblers Anonymous. He gets the help he needs, and he proves to the trustees that he's on his own 2 feet again. And they eventually get to the point where they feel comfortable that Tim can get his inheritance as well. Well, part of his inheritance, the 50k. The inheritance of the money side of things. Matt, however, has a real drink problem, and right now they don't think it's a really good idea. They could use his 50k for his benefit. For instance, they could use it to pay his rent. They could potentially, if they could find a property, buy a very small flat or something for him to live in, so he hasn't got to worry about paying rent, and they can make sure he's got a roof over his head. Obviously, in the meantime, Martin's still alive. Martin now passes away, so the house that had been kind of on loan to him goes back, and now that can also go down to the kids if it's ready, if the time is right. And like I said, Bob and Carol now know Polly's in a good position, so she can get her third of the house, Tim can get his third of the house, and what would happen almost certainly is the house would be sold. So it's the value of that house goes into the trust or down to the kids in their shares. So Polly can now get her share of the house as well. Tim gets his share of the house. Matt's still not right, but now there's a bit more money sat in the trust waiting for Matt. Essentially, at this point, everything in the trust is the 1/3 for Matt, because Polly's shares all been given out, and Tim's shares all been given out. So now the trustees have a bit more money to play with, and they actually probably could now go and buy a property and let Matt live in it. They could even buy a second property and provide an income and build up a little bit of a fund for Matt at some point down the line. But if his problem continues, they don't have to give it to him, ever. It's fully at the discretion of the trustees, hence why it's called a discretionary trust. So this is a really important point. Your trustees have so much power here, you've really got to be able to trust them. As long as you do, they will do everything brilliantly. They will make sure this trust runs perfectly. But if actually they go a bit rogue, not great. However, one thing to bear in mind here, Bob and Carol, they might be trustees, but they were not one of the 4 names, 1, 2, 3, 4, who were named as beneficiaries. They cannot give it to themselves. That's something you've really got to bear in mind here. They can't give it to themselves, but they could choose to give all the rest of it to Tim, for instance. Or they could give it all to Polly. They can do what they want to. And they might actually do that down the line, not out of spite, but if Matt is proving to be a problem, let's say Matt now passes away and he never ended up inheriting, well then they can just give it out to Polly and Tim. So really the key message here is that you're giving your trustees full flexibility to adapt to the situation based on what it is at the time of them managing it, rather than, let's say, 15 years before when Sue sets this trust up and she's got this big disaster going on. By the time the trustees are ready to give the money out, the situation, at least for 2 of the kids, is a lot better and they can do it. So it just allows them to react to the situation at the time of giving the money out, rather than at the time of writing the will. And that's why discretionary trusts are so great. So any families with with any of these kind of issues going on with adult children, discretionary trusts are fantastic solutions. And when I was learning about trusts to start with, and we would do scenarios just like this, I used to think, God, what are the odds of having 3 children with issues going on, and maybe a partner at the top of Martin who is not married and not the father of the kids. And it's a really mess. It's very unlikely to happen. And once I started going out and seeing clients, I realised it's not that uncommon. Maybe not quite as extreme, but very similar cases. You get lots of them like this. And that's why trusts in general are brilliant. And for situations like this, discretionary trusts are perfect.